Deborah Murphy. We are here at Farm Tech, and I'm joined by Darryl Bricker. He's the CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs and also a keynote speaker here at Farm Tech. I was reading the description of your talk, and it said, Canadians think we know who we are, but we don't. So
True.
Maybe let's start there. Who do Canadians think we are?
We think that we're the Great White North. We think that we are this country that used to exist maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago that no longer exists. The truth is that Canada is no longer this group of people that are clustered around central Canada, that are more rural in our orientation, that are hewers of wood and drawers of water. That's not what our country is anymore. And whenever you point that out to people, it's first of all creates an existential crisis because they think, oh my God, this is what I thought we were and we're not really that. And then they start thinking about the places that they live and what they see and what goes on in their day-to-day lives, and they realize that, yeah, we have changed a lot and we're going to be changing even more as the future rolls in.
So why are we so stuck in the past? Is it a romantic vision of what we want, or?
Well, I think that there's what I call a Laurentian elite vision of what this country is that's basically informed by downtown elites who live in places like Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal that say this is what our country is. And it might be their country, but it's not the country that the rest of the country, the rest of the people in the country live in. It's becoming a much more urban country, particularly suburban country, a much more multicultural country, and a country that's much more oriented towards Western Canada than towards Central and Eastern Canada.
And that's interesting. You spoke of immigration in your talk. Where are we seeing a lot of the movement from other countries?
Well, most of our immigration used to come from the United Kingdom, the United States, Western Europe. Now our immigration is coming basically across the Pacific Ocean. So it's people coming disproportionately from countries like the Philippines, which is our #1 source of immigrants now, China and India. So Pacific orientation.
And then where are they ending up in Canada?
In the suburbs to the west.
To the west, interesting. So what does this mean for us as in the agriculture industry?
Well, what it means is that the types of tastes, consumer tastes that are going to be driving agricultural production are going to be more and more informed in Canada by what people are doing in Asia. So as they'll bring those tastes with them as they become citizens of the country. Now, as we've seen in Canada over the space of the last few decades in which we've gone through this process of greater immigration, it will be a fusion. It will be a combination of what we recognize as more traditionally Canadian and what these Asian cultures bring to us. But it's not going to be the Yorkshire pudding and roast beef of my younger generation. It's going to be a very different country.
As far as demand goes, though, is Canada growing? Are we going to reach that 2050 population growth that everybody was talking about worldwide, but also specifically in Canada?
The global population is not going to grow either as rapidly or as strongly as is being predicted. It's probably going to reach a peak of about somewhere between 8 and 9 billion somewhere around mid-century, and it's going to start to decline after that. In Canada, we're going to continue with some fairly robust growth, but not as robust as being predicted by Statistics Canada. And there's two reasons for that. I think that the data on fertility in this country, so the production of new children in this country, is probably more optimistic than what the truth is going to prove out to be. And secondly, even though we are really interested in continuing to have high levels of immigration in this country, likely immigrants are going to start to dry up as the production of children in countries that are traditionally immigrant countries, particularly in Asia, are going to start to dry up. And also as the middle class grows in those countries, there's less and less incentive for people to move to a place like Canada. So my expectation is that yes, the Canadian population is going to continue to grow, but probably not as robustly as is being predicted right now.
And why are people choosing to have fewer kids? Have you looked into that at all?
Well, let's look at your life. Or look at the life of your mother's. Or let's take a look at the life of your grandmother. So how many kids did your grandmother have? How many kids did your mother have? And how many kids do you plan to have? And what we see is from generation to generation it gets smaller. So the typical Canadian woman back in 1960 got married around the age of 20 and probably had her first kid soon after that, and probably had 4 kids while she was building her family. Today, the typical Canadian woman gets married at around the age of 30, has her first kid shortly after that, probably has a second kid, if she has a second kid, shortly after the first kid, and then that's it. Mm-hmm. Nobody's having 3 kids anymore. Nobody's having 4 kids. Back in 1960, the average was 4. So what's happened is the choices that women are making about their lives are different than the choices that their mothers made and the choices that their grandmothers made. And that makes all the difference in terms of productivity or fertility.
And that's changing the aging demographic as well,
Absolutely.
right?
So you combine that with the fact that people are also living longer. So the average Canadian back in the 1920s lived to the age of 57. The average Canadian today is living to around the age of 82. So we've increased the lifespan quite a bit. And what's really starting to build is the older elderly. So people are now more people are living to their 80s and 90s and even to 100. So 7,900 Canadians today are around the age of 100 years of age. By 2061, Statistics Canada tells us it's going to be almost 80,000 people who are going to be in that category. So yes, the population is aging, the number of kids coming into the population is shrinking, and the amount of immigration is really what is responsible for the population growth in Canada today.
Should we be worried?
Well, it's, as I say in something that I'm writing right now, it's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but it's an important and a big thing. And I think that we shouldn't be worried as much as that we should be observant. And we should be making decisions that recognize that this is what the world is going to become. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it's just a big thing.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess you mentioned that we can use the immigration statistics to start thinking about maybe diversifying our portfolio, what we're offering in terms of agricultural produce. What about the aging demographic? Is that going to change what we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the reasons that Canadians are living longer is because they've changed their diets. I mean, we're eating things that are a lot more healthy for us. Older Canadians are interested in things, they're eating things that are more healthy for them. But the other part that we sometimes forget, actually, we always tend to forget, is it's the older folks that have the money. And so they're willing to pay a premium for products that are designed for them. They're not a specialty market. In fact, what they are is the new mainstream, because they're a big segment of the population, but they also have all the resources.
But do they care as much about specifics? Like, we're seeing a lot of trends in consumers saying, I want specifically maybe hormone-free or antibiotic-free. Is the aging demographic as into that?
I think the point in all this, Deborah, is nobody really knows. Because we just kind of assume them away. They're like a non-existent part of the marketing mix. Everybody is so gunned up about marketing to young people that they forget that there's this huge group of other people, which in fact is the biggest part of the Canadian population, that has all of the wealth, and they just pretend it doesn't exist. So, and I think it's a prejudice in the marketing profession. If you walk around any advertising agency and take a look at who's walking up and down the halls, they're not old folks, they're young folks, and they make ads for each other. So, you know, social media, for example. Okay, social media is really important for young people, but the people who are going to really drive commerce on social media are the people who have the money. It's older people. So what are we producing for them?
It's the loud minority effect again.
Yeah, it's people who, and I don't want to dismiss the millennial or the Gen Z population. They're obviously going to be extremely important in the marketplace going forward. It's just the reason I hit so hard on this point is the other group that I'm talking about, which is the aging baby boomers. People tend to ignore. They don't see them as a market of potential.
Darryl Bricker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.